The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Somehow, yesterday, in the chaos of everything that was going on over the weekend, we just didn't even cover the results in South Carolina. There was a Democratic primary in South Carolina on Saturday. My sincerest of apologies. I don't even know what happened, Lewis. We didn't cover it. We had the data. We were all set to go, and somehow it didn't make it into the program.
These things happen. Yes, we can't be too hard on ourselves.
Not only did Hillary Clinton defeat Bernie Sanders in South Carolina, she did it by almost twice the margin predicted by polling. So this was a really significant win, more in terms of momentum and expectations than in terms of actual delegates. Let's look at how the results compared to the polling. The polling average going into that Democratic South Carolina primary over the weekend, Hillary Clinton 58, Bernie Sanders just under 31, a Hillary Clinton lead of about 27.5. The actual results, Lewis, 73.5% of the vote for Hillary Clinton, 26 for Bernie Sanders, defeating Bernie Sanders by almost 50 points, nearly twice the predicted margin from the polls. Bernie Sanders has the money to stay in this for a while. He raised, I believe, over $40 million in the recently completed February. He has vowed to stay in this thing until the convention. But from a practical standpoint, tonight's Super Tuesday, the 12 contests tonight for the Democrats are going to tell us a lot about the sort of practical viability of the Sanders candidacy, because this was, we haven't been sugarcoating anything all along this entire race. That was a brutal defeat in South Carolina.
Yeah, well, this is I don't think we've seen anyone outperform or underperform both simultaneously the polls by such a large margin on either side in any primary so far. So very scary for Bernie Sanders, and maybe looking very good for Hillary Clinton.
And all of the different scenarios that we can talk about in terms of the math on the Republican side, well, if the non-Trump support coalesces, if that, this, the other thing, it's way simpler on the Democratic side. When you just have two candidates, you have to start getting more than 50% at some point, either of the popular vote in states that do proportional delegate allocation, or just winning states in states that are winner take all. So you can get 47% of the vote from here until the day of the convention, and you will lose, right? There is no way around this, Lewis. What Bernie Sanders must do is very, very clear at this point. Whatever momentum benefit he received from these early wins and sort of almost wins or near ties in the primaries, they need to convert to wins soon, or the window of opportunity is going to start to close. It's just simple math.
Yeah, well, I think today is really the day. This will be the deciding day.
No question about it. So we will continue to follow it. We will have all of the results tomorrow. What else can I say? Now, let's talk about tonight's Super Tuesday primaries. Let's start with the Democratic side, okay? There are far more delegates at stake tonight, and we're not quite ready for that yet, Lewis. There are far more delegates at stake tonight alone. Lewis really wants to get to these numbers, so we put them up on the screen for our audience. All of the primaries to date combined don't have even nearly the number of delegates that are available tonight. So, Lewis, from a mathematical standpoint, tonight is huge. From a momentum standpoint, the early primaries have been important, but now we're really getting into the meat of this thing.
Yeah. Well, Super Tuesday, Dave. That's the meat. That's the what is it? The sirloin, the fillet. How would you describe it?
Bone-in ribeye. Call it what you want.
Okay.
So Republicans have 11 contests tonight. Democrats have 12. 11 states plus American Samoa's caucus. The American Samoan caucus is, we don't really know much about it. There's 6 delegates at stake. We don't really have polling. Not expected to be the difference maker. So if I may, Lewis, I will talk about the 11 states that are voting tonight. Let's now look at what things appear to be shaping up like for tonight. In Alabama, Hillary Clinton is up 44. In Arkansas, Hillary Clinton is up 25. This is based on the most recent polling, which admittedly is not that recent in some of these states. In Colorado, Hillary Clinton is up 28. In Georgia, Hillary Clinton is up 36. In Massachusetts, on average, Hillary Clinton is up by 5, a close state for Bernie. In Minnesota, Hillary Clinton is up 34. In Oklahoma, Bernie Sanders is up 6. In Tennessee and Texas, Hillary Clinton is up by just over 25 points each. In his home state of Vermont, kind of. I mean, he's from Brooklyn, but his home legislative state of Vermont, Bernie Sanders up a brutal 76%, reminiscent of the black Norwegian medal that Lewis likes. And in Virginia, Hillary Clinton up 23. So, Lewis, these are the most recent numbers we have. Bernie Sanders, again, we're speaking soberly and pragmatically, he needs to significantly overperform the polls in any number of these compelling primary races to be mathematically in this thing by 24 hours from now, 12 hours from now even.
Well, I think we could pick the number, but I wouldn't say any number. It's disturbing news for the Bernie Sanders campaign, isn't it?
If Bernie Sanders wins only Oklahoma and Vermont tonight, realistically, the math is going to not signal a path for him to a Democratic primary nomination. He needs to overperform tonight. And I know that, as progressives, we have this idea that, hey, the real progressive, the most progressive candidate is going to find a way to that nomination. We have to be very aware of the fact that if the Sanders supporters and those who recognize that he is to the left of Hillary Clinton don't get out and vote tonight in force, right? In far bigger numbers than what the polling estimates are suggesting, which could happen, that the window is going to begin to close for Bernie Sanders. He has to win. He has to have a strong showing somewhere tonight, and just eking out 2 wins. Well, Vermont wouldn't be eking out a win. He's up 76, but the delegate count is just so low there. And Oklahoma, he's got to make things happen tonight.
But do we really see him? Do we expect what happened to Hillary in South Carolina to happen to Bernie in any of these states? I mean,
maybe.
I think maybe I find that highly unlikely that it would be that off.
Some have been
polls.
hypothesizing that, for example, in Massachusetts, where anecdotally a poll here and there has Bernie up, but on average he's down, he could end up really getting out the youth vote in Massachusetts and doing very well. So there are examples, right? We'll just have to wait and see, and we'll have the numbers tomorrow, and we will see what the Democratic picture is looking like at that point. Now, let's talk about the Republican Super Tuesday primaries that are going on tonight. The narrative has been, okay, Trump is leading. He has a plurality of Republican support, but the non-Trump support, if it were to coalesce around one of the remaining candidates, now 4 remaining non-Trump candidates, it would blow Trump out of the water. However, we have one new national poll that has Donald Trump at 49%. So we'll compare this one new poll and the Real Clear Politics average of recent polls. In the new CNN ORC poll released yesterday, Donald Trump is carrying 49% support among the national Republican primary. Ted Cruz in third place, with 15%. Marco Rubio very close in second place with 16%. Carson 10, Kasich 6. Now, this is one poll. When we look at an average of recent polls, Trump is in the lead with about 36% support. Ted Cruz right around 20. Rubio 17. Carson and Kasich just around 9. So still, Lewis, if we look at an average of recent polls, there's about 65% of the Republican Party that is supporting someone other than Trump. If they can get together, they could knock Trump out. If you put more weight in this 49% support CNN poll, the numbers are starting to get very complex for the non-Trump contingent of this Republican primary.
Yeah, I think maybe we're starting to see people just realize that certain candidates don't have a chance.
Wow.
That Trump has serious momentum.
Wow.
And so maybe people are just throwing more support behind Trump. Maybe they like the way he acts on the debate stage. I don't know what it is.
Let's look specifically, though, at the contests tonight in Super Tuesday. Who is looking like they are going to win? This is based on the most recent polling we have from these states. Some of these polls are not that recent. Trump is leading Alabama with 39% support. Trump is slightly ahead in Alaska, 28-24 over Ted Cruz. Trump is not ahead in Arkansas. Cruz 27 in Arkansas. Trump and Rubio tied at 23. In Georgia, Trump is almost doubling both Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, way ahead. Trump is killing it in Massachusetts, reportedly 44% support to Rubio's 18. Kasich, very strong. He is strongest here in Massachusetts at 16%. Minnesota, Trump is in third place to Rubio and Cruz. In Oklahoma, Trump is ahead with 34%. Tennessee, Trump way ahead, 41% support. Texas, tougher. Ted Cruz's home state. Well, I mean, he's from Canada, but from the point of view of picking a state that he's home, that is his home in the U.S., it is Texas. Cruz is ahead there by about 9 points over Trump, 36-27. Trump is well ahead in Vermont, and Trump is pretty far ahead in Virginia. Ted Cruz in third place there. Marco Rubio in second with 25%. So what can we say, Lewis, about tonight? Trump is leading in about half of tonight's states. From the point of view of the Republican Party, if Marco Rubio doesn't win several states tonight, there's really no indication that he's going to win several states tonight. Maybe he needs to drop out and endorse Ted Cruz, because remember, even though Marco Rubio keeps giving campaign speeches or speeches after primaries that sound and feel like victory speeches, the guy hasn't won a single state. And if he doesn't win at least a couple tonight, I think there is a real question for the non-Trump contingent of the Republican Party. Do we get Rubio out and say that he should endorse Ted Cruz to try to coalesce some of the support? And believe me, I'm talking from a strategy standpoint. I think Marco Rubio is far less crazy than Ted Cruz, far less creepy than Ted Cruz. Thirst aside, when I look at Marco Rubio, I see someone who is far less scary than when I look at Ted Cruz. These are some serious questions the Republican Party has to contend with here.
Yeah, and I find that I've never been on that stage. You've never been on that stage. It just seems that there's something about it that when you're there, you want to stay there.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's just a personal thing. I don't know if logic is really entering into the equation yet. Maybe after Super Tuesday it will.
There's sort of two arguments. If you want to try to knock Trump out before the convention and avoid a brokered convention, the argument would be get everybody but one candidate, one non-Trump candidate, out sooner than later so that the voting can coalesce and start building delegate victories. The other side would be, if you want to get to a brokered convention and just ensure that Republican insiders hand this thing to someone other than Donald Trump, then these candidates should stay. And the risk is, and this is the dream scenario for progressives, that the brokered convention leads to Donald Trump getting mad and running as a third-party candidate, which would all but guarantee victory for the eventual Democratic nominee. Send me your thoughts on this. Tell me where you're voting, when you're voting, have you voted? I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedi.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is something I want to talk about because it just never really comes up. Our program is actually supported by members. It's not supported by big media conglomerates or huge corporations. We have this thing called the membership program. And today's new member of the day is Sean Mahoney. Sean, thank you so much for signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. One of the greatest member benefits is after the show, there's an entire other show called the bonus show just for our members. And you can get instant access to that at davidpakman.com/membership. And I will mention, today is Super Tuesday. Friday, we are going to have a Super Friday membership special. It's going to be related to tonight's election results. That's all I will say so far. But if you've been thinking of signing up for membership and been saying, well, I don't know, it's a little expensive, it's a little bit out of my budget, this Friday, we are going to be doing an email blast to everybody who signs up for our mailing list at davidpakman.com. And the membership special will be related to the Super Tuesday election results. So get on that mailing list Friday. You will be notified about that. Okay, last week, Lewis, I talked about getting on Instagram at the request of so many of our viewers, people wanting behind-the-scenes stuff and pictures, things related to the David Pakman Show. I did that. And people are just up in arms, Lewis. They're just loving it so much that there was a suggestion that each week I show something from my Instagram feed to the audience. So for people who are watching with us today, this is the most liked picture from my Instagram feed from the last week. It's a picture of Lewis with a guy who looks suspiciously like the singer Rod Stewart, but actually isn't. This is from a bar that Lewis frequents that I was invited to by Lewis over the weekend. And indeed, this guy not only looks like Rod Stewart, kind of a Boston version of Rod Stewart, But he actually, isn't he a former or current Rod Stewart impersonator, Lewis?
Well, I don't know a lot about this guy, but
Yeah.
from what I gathered at the bar, people call him Southie Rod Stewart because
Right.
he hangs out in South Boston.
Yeah.
And when they put Rod Stewart on the radio, he goes nuts and starts dancing.
Yeah.
And I guess he's just kind of a Boston non-professional Rod Stewart impersonator.
So maybe by impersonator, we mean when he's out socially and he hears Rod Stewart songs, he likes it.
Yeah, I think that's it. And people take pictures with him, and that's pretty much it.
So this is the most liked picture from my Instagram feed from the last week. You can, of course, find me on Instagram at david.pacman. And if you're only listening with us today, either on the radio or on Progressive Voices or on iHeartRadio or on Stitcher or on iTunes or the podcast or any of the audio-only platforms that we're on, check out the picture on my Instagram feed at david.pacman. Yesterday, Lewis, people completely rioting in the streets because I put up a great short video of me making coffee with my new espresso machine. And it was just people were out of control because they were worried that the crema on my espresso was not up to par. And that's something else that happened on Instagram yesterday.
I didn't see that one, but I have watched you do that in person. And it's
You've expressed concerns about my crema as well.
I have.
Yeah.
It was you hadn't honed your skills yet with the espresso machine.
Right.
And so it's a work in progress.
All right. We have brought back in 2016 with the help of segment producer and intern and member Sam Miller, who is here today, Morality with Motamedi. People really liking the return of Morality with Motamedi, where we pose ethical and moral dilemmas to producer Lewis, gives us a sense of his moral compass or lack thereof. Today, we are going to deal with a question from Josh. Josh said, what if Lewis was put in charge of making the human population of Earth sustainable? How would he implement a strategy? Would it be moral to stop new births? Would it be moral to kill people when they've reached a certain age to avoid having to stop births? Lewis, explore this scenario. Population control. It is the planet is becoming unsustainable in this scenario, although we know we actually have plenty of room for way more people right now. What is the moral way to implement a sustainable population strategy?
Well, there may not be a moral way to do that.
Really?
Right? I think you start with, and I don't think this is unreasonable, start with what China started with. Say you can only have one child per couple. I think that's a pretty good place to start.
Limiting birth, in other words. So given the options of, there's sort of two components to population, right? What's the death rate and what's the birth rate? These are the sort of two main ways, other than establishing an outpost on another planet. These are the two main ways of controlling the population of the planet. And you're saying, rather than saying, okay, if you get to 95, that's enough life for you. We kill you so that we can control the population. You're saying we allow people to keep birthing children, but they are allowed to birth one child. And of course, as we know, a birth rate of one per couple actually does, over the long term, reduce the population. That's where you would start.
I think that is the most sane, moral, and simple place to start.
Is it simple, though? Because as we know from China, which has recently ended their one-child policy, one-child policies lead to, number one, sex-based abortion, right? If you're going to have a daughter, the daughter may not. Okay.
Just China's societal issues had something to do with that. I don't think that would be the case everywhere.
Why not? If people know that they're only allowed to have one child, and they say, okay, just the way it goes, the sort of family line passes through male children, which is sort of another societal construct anyway.
Right.
Wouldn't you be more likely to abort a girl child, as we have seen happen in China?
Maybe some people would want to do that, but those are societal issues, and so I don't think we should even discuss that, because from a practical standpoint, I think clearly having people stick with one child is the place to start.
What scenarios would you find yourself being okay with? A sort of, once you've lived X number of years, that's it for you. We kill you.
Well, I'm not big on that, but
Really?
But if we're talking about a situation here where everyone understands that there is overpopulation,
Yeah.
and that it is not sustainable,
Right.
and that we are all going to die if this persists, then I guess morals change, right?
Would there be any situation, if morals are fluid, depending on the scenario that you're talking about, where the richest people would be able to pay? You know how we have carbon taxes? If you're polluting, you have a carbon tax. An overpopulation tax. If you're rich enough, you can pay to either stay alive if you've instituted some maximum age for people to control the population, or you can pay if you want to have more than one child. Do you think that there would be a solution there, or are you against the idea of giving to the rich in this way that would absolutely jeopardize the poor who would not have the ability to pay?
That is a definite no. I would not allow that because money is not going to solve this sustainability problem no matter what you do. Because that's just, it's not an answer to the problem. And so I don't see how more government revenue would help, or revenue to me. Maybe I'm the king of the world at this point, and that's why I'm deciding this. But I guess what people want to know is what happens when the one-child thing isn't working, and things are just so crazy that there needs to be a drastic reduction in population immediately,
right?
Or everyone perishes.
Do you ask for volunteers and then give payouts to the family for people willing to be killed in order for the betterment of the planet?
Volunteering would certainly be an option.
Really?
Why not throw it out there? If people would like to volunteer, by all means. If that, I suppose, would help. So what do you do if you have to resort to extremes? What do you do? Do you start a world war in hopes that it will eradicate much of the population?
Now, that certainly doesn't seem moral. Okay, so we've heard from Lewis. He would go the way of controlling birth. Let's take 2 days now to get feedback from the audience about ideas for population control, and then we will follow up on this on Thursday, as we like to do. Let's take a quick break. After the break, this is already up on YouTube, and it is doing very, very well. The real differences between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, explained in relatively simple English. That's after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
As Democratic presidential candidates Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton have duked it out this primary season for the Democratic nomination, we've seen a lot of memes floating around the internet comparing the two candidates side by side, issue by issue. And with all of the speeches and rallies and debates we've been sort of overwhelmed with over the last few months, it can be difficult to sort through exactly how these two candidates disagree. They are agreeable on many things, but there are also significant differences on critical issues. Let's take a look, issue by issue, at how Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton differ. Before we jump right into the political issues one by one, let's take a quick look at the candidates from a more general perspective. Both candidates have changed positions on certain issues in the past, each to varying degrees. So let's lay out some general assessments of their political orientation as of now in 2016. Bernie Sanders describes himself as a democratic socialist, which, as should be clear by now, does not mean that he wants a government takeover of private industry or anything similar. It means, as he puts it, that the U.S. is currently not providing enough basic resources like healthcare, and that the government has more of a responsibility to combat wealth inequality. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, when asked whether or not she sees herself as a liberal, has avoided labeling herself in that way. There are a number of issues on which she is considerably more conservative than Sanders and even than President Obama. She's described herself as a modern version of a progressive, and she has said that what differentiates her from more progressive candidates is that she likes to, quote, get things done. Quickly looking side by side at both candidates' experience in public office, Sanders' first time holding public office was as mayor of Burlington, the largest city in Vermont, where he was reelected 3 times. In 1987, U.S. News and World Report put him on their list of America's best mayors. He then served for 16 years as Vermont's only U.S. representative before being elected U.S. Senator from Vermont in 2006, the office he still holds. Hillary Clinton, of course, after being First Lady of Arkansas and then First Lady of the United States, was elected U.S. Senator from New York in 2001. She left that position in 2009 when President Obama appointed her Secretary of State. She resigned from that post in 2013. In terms of years of experience, let's break that down. We see Bernie Sanders has served in public office about 3 times longer than Hillary Clinton, has served in the U.S. Congress 3 times longer, and he has over twice as much time in a foreign policy related position. Sanders actually has more experience than any candidate from either party running currently as far as time in public office, time in Congress, and time dealing with U.S. foreign policy. Lastly, before we dig into the issues one by one, let's take a glance at the individual wealth of each candidate, which can serve as a sort of context within which we can look at some of their ideas. Bernie Sanders' net worth is about $420,000, which mostly comes from salaries and pensions from being in public office. Other than Marco Rubio, Sanders has the smallest financial worth of any candidate from either party. Hillary Clinton is worth an estimated $31.3 million. Her money comes from investments, speaking at corporate events, and writing books. She is the second wealthiest candidate from either party behind billionaire Donald Trump. So now let's talk about both candidates' approaches to dealing with the financial industry. Roosevelt Institute fellow Mike Consall has said, quote, "Agency heads have a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. If you had someone who is a populist, it would change the tenor very quickly in rulemaking and enforcement, especially at the Federal Reserve. If they think a bank is a huge systemic risk, they, along with other members of the Financial Stability Oversight Council, can break it up. Those appointments could have real impact." So to begin with, Bernie Sanders wants to put a 15% cap on interest for credit cards and consumer loans, and he wants to put a $2 cap on all ATM fees. He wants to tax Wall Street and pay for his college tuition plan by putting a 0.5% tax on stock market trades and a 0.1% fee on bonds and a 0.005% fee on derivative trades. Hillary Clinton wants to regulate the financial industry by better enforcing the 2010 Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. She wants to put taxes only on high-risk and high-frequency trades, which is less aggressive than Bernie Sanders' plan. Regarding the U.S.'s biggest banks, Bernie Sanders wants to create a new version of the set of Glass-Steagall regulations, which was mostly repealed under President Bill Clinton. Bernie Sanders vows to make a list of banks that are, quote, too big to fail and set out to break them up within his first year in office. Now, to the contrary, Hillary Clinton has expressed doubts about how helpful Glass-Steagall would have been in preventing the 2008 financial crisis. She instead advocates a more vague plan that involves reorganizing and reconstructing banks as needed on a case-by-case basis. Another economic area we should look at is the concept of free trade, the idea of reducing rules on trade that affect things like workers' rights and the environment. Bernie Sanders, in sticking to his pro-labor views, has never supported a free trade agreement in his career. He was against NAFTA at the time of its adoption. He opposed the formation of the World Trade Organization. He has always stood with the Senate Progressive Caucus against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And he wants to regulate trade with China, citing a desire to improve Chinese working conditions and protect American jobs. Other than the Central America Free Trade Agreement, Hillary Clinton has supported every free trade agreement she's ever voted on or been involved with. As Secretary of State, Clinton was one of the most vocal proponents of the TPP. She called it the gold standard of trade agreements and lobbied on its behalf to nations throughout the Pacific. Since then, though, she has revealed doubts about its effects on certain member nations. Keeping with workers' rights, let's review the stances on the U.S. minimum wage of the two Democratic candidates. Bernie Sanders is advocating a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour, and Hillary Clinton wants to increase the minimum wage to $12 an hour. Let's get into social issues, LGBT rights. Hillary Clinton has been pro same-sex marriage for about the last 2 years. Hillary supported Bill Clinton when he established Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the Defense of Marriage Act. And in 2004, Hillary Clinton said that heterosexual marriage is a, quote, fundamental bedrock principle of our society. And even throughout her presidential campaign in 2008, She did not support same-sex marriage. She opposed gay marriage as late as 2013. There is record of Bernie Sanders showing support for the LGBT community as far back as the early 70s. In 1983, as mayor of Burlington, he created a gay pride day in the city. He has long been for same-sex civil unions, but he's been showing support for same-sex marriage for about 15 years. He supported Vermont in becoming the first U.S. state to recognize same-sex civil unions, as well as becoming the first state to legalize same-sex marriage through legislation. Another big social issue, of course, is marijuana legalization. Hillary Clinton has never believed in legalizing or decriminalizing any drugs, including marijuana. She wants marijuana possession to remain as a federal crime, but she says she wouldn't obstruct states that decriminalize it and that she'd allow research for medical marijuana. Bernie Sanders has been vocal about wanting to decriminalize drugs, especially marijuana, since he first became a politician. And in the Senate, he's worked with Rand Paul on multiple legislative acts that would either decriminalize or legalize marijuana, such as ending federal prohibition on Marijuana Act of 2015. Exploring some other aspects of criminal justice reform, Sanders has opposed the death penalty his entire political career. Hillary Clinton is an advocate for capital punishment. She came out in support of Bill Clinton's reauthorization of the death penalty, and she ran on being pro-death penalty during her 2000 campaign for Senate. But today, she does say she wants the death penalty to be used less. And before Bill Clinton's presidency, she actually used to be against it altogether. Clinton has said, "I do not favor abolishing the death penalty, but that cases in which it's used should be, quote, very limited and rare." The day after Hillary Clinton made these remarks, Bernie Sanders directly responded by saying, quote, "I think, as with so much violence in this world today, I just don't think the state itself, whether it's the state government or federal government, should be in the business of killing people." Hillary Clinton's campaign has taken the same amount of money from the prison lobby as Marco Rubio's campaign, but Clinton and Sanders' other stated positions on prison reform aren't too different, even though, as we mentioned on the show the other day, for some reason, Chelsea Clinton called Sanders' prison reform ideas worrying. Definitely a hot button issue for this election is healthcare. Is Obamacare working? Are we going to change it? Are we going to go in the direction of single payer, etc.? Bernie Sanders wants a $1.38 trillion single payer Medicare for all program with no out-of-pocket expenses. His plan would give the government more power in negotiating pharmaceutical prices, and he says it would diminish government healthcare spending by $6 trillion over 10 years. It would reduce medical costs for the average middle-class family by about $5,000 annually, and thus almost all individuals would be saving far more money on medical bills than they'd be contributing in taxes to the program. In 1994, Hillary Clinton said that single-payer health care in America is preferable and inevitable. But today, she wants to stick with the President's Affordable Care Act. She wants to improve health care by enhancing aspects of Obamacare, such as the cost of deductibles. So let's talk about immigration. There is currently immigration legislation proposed by Democrats that would provide a path to citizenship for several million undocumented immigrants. Bernie Sanders, as president, says that he would use executive action to automatically give deportation deferrals to this group of people. Hillary Clinton says she would not go beyond the executive actions already laid out by the Obama administration. She also would not grant large-scale deferral to undocumented immigrants, and she puts a big emphasis on Mexican border security. And let's just say that Hillary Clinton's past record on immigration is less than progressive. Of course, energy and the environment. Something we've been hearing a lot about concerning energy is carbon taxes. Carbon taxes create more demand for less polluting forms of energy like natural gas, solar, wind, nuclear, and hydroelectric. Not all renewable, however. Taxes on dirty energy have proven to be the most cost-effective way of countering emissions. Those types of taxes haven't been increased at the federal level since 1993, and there's obviously a huge amount of things we could do with that revenue. Bernie Sanders wants this sort of tax on carbon emitters, and Hillary Clinton does not. Bernie Sanders wants to ban fracking and offshore drilling, while Hillary Clinton is in favor of allowing both. The Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton's campaign do take a lot of money from oil companies. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was such a proponent of fracking that she negotiated a number of third world countries into adopting the practice. But Clinton's stated energy plan does hope to multiply the U.S.'s solar power sevenfold by 2020. Let's take a turn to foreign policy, specifically Iraq and Syria, past and present. Bernie Sanders in 2003 voted against the Iraq invasion and gave a very impassioned speech on the House floor supporting his vote. Hillary Clinton voted for the invasion and has since said that it was a mistake. As far as fighting ISIS in Iraq and Syria today, Sanders wants to avoid direct U.S. involvement, wants to empower the local Muslim nations to wage their own fight against terrorism, and he wants the U.S. to rein in its drone program. Hillary Clinton has talked about wanting the U.S. to take more action against Assad and has criticized President Obama for not arming Syrian rebels faster and more heavily. And Hillary Clinton wants to take a more confrontational approach with Russia in Syria, advocating the enforcement of a no-fly zone. Bernie Sanders opposes a Russian no-fly zone. And while on the subject of national security policy, Bernie Sanders voted against the Patriot Act as well as its subsequent renewals, and he characterizes the NSA as being, quote, out of control. Every year, Bernie Sanders gets an A rating from the ACLU. Hillary Clinton voted for the Patriot Act and its renewals. She received a 67% rating from the ACLU during her final year in the Senate. Hillary Clinton has also advocated even increasing NSA surveillance through things like social media and watching people who leave the country. So there they are. Like I said, there are definitely things that Sanders and Clinton do agree on, but we've outlined what are definitely the most relevant differences between the two candidates. It's a tight race in terms of polls, and there are definitely still plenty of state primaries left to go. But we hope this gives you a better idea of exactly where Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton differ, at least as of right now, on some key topics.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Clarence Thomas has spoken, literally. Quite famously, it's been about a decade since Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas spoke during oral arguments in the Supreme Court, and yesterday, suddenly, he spoke. Now, what topic was seemingly so important that it caused Clarence Thomas to break his 10-year vow of de facto silence? None other than guns. He asked many questions and completely changed the direction of the oral arguments in Voisin v. U.S., which is a case involving domestic violence and gun rights. The Supreme Court is currently considering a case which would make it easier for people convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence offenses to keep their gun rights. As you may know, although you may not, since 1996, if you're convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence offense, you are banned for life from possessing a gun. Clarence Thomas stepped in and raised a broader constitutional question, which, as some are suggesting, maybe would have been raised by the late Antonin Scalia. Here's a quote from Mother Jones about how it went down. The oral arguments in the case appeared to be wrapping up early. Ilana Eisenstein, the Assistant Solicitor General, said to the justices, if there are no further questions, long before her time had run out. Then Clarence Thomas shocked the courtroom by asking her whether she could think of any other example where a misdemeanor criminal conviction could deprive an American citizen of a constitutional right for a lifetime, in this case, the right to own a firearm, which at least as of now is still a constitutional right. This continues to be explained in Mother Jones by going on and saying Thomas continued to press her, asking whether a misdemeanor conviction could deprive other people of other constitutional rights, perhaps under the First Amendment. Let's say that a publisher is reckless in the use of children and what could be considered indecent displays, he posited in a deep, booming voice rarely heard in the chamber. Let's say it's a misdemeanor. Could you suspend that publisher's right to ever publish again? Now, Lewis, it's so crazy that Clarence Thomas spoke during oral arguments that reporters started running into the courtroom. I mean, imagine the scene, 10 years without speaking, to the point where when you merely ask a couple of questions, the courtroom is all of a sudden filled with reporters.
It's shocking. Yeah, it's also quite interesting, as you pointed out, that as soon as there's no Scalia,
Right.
Thomas talks. And I don't know what the dynamic was like in there. I don't really know much about that.
Right.
All I know is he's been silent.
And this actually has been sort of discussed by Clarence Thomas. He says from when he was a little kid, he always preferred to listen. And he says this dates back to when he was in school. He had a particular accent, which made his speech difficult for others to understand. And he sort of took to listening instead of talking. And of course, a number of followers of the Supreme Court are saying, there's this idea that Antonin Scalia's presence was the sort of more comfortable public speaking voice of Clarence Thomas, and maybe he didn't feel as much of a need to speak when Antonin Scalia was there. Very shortly after the passing of Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas is all of a sudden commenting, and it is very, very interesting, and we'll continue to follow it, but this is something that legal scholars have talked about for a very long time, a decade vow of silence in practice.
Yeah, and it's a strange practice. I feel that he should be part of discourse, but I guess it's his constitutional right to remain silent.
Well,
Dave.
the counter is he is a judge, and he can express his opinions in written form as part of the decision, and that's that. Of course, every once in a while, maybe people want to hear from the guy and see what he's thinking as these oral arguments are going on. Very, very interesting and just generally unusual situation. Let's talk a little bit about Ben Carson. In a last-ditch effort to remain even remotely relevant and pander to the low-information religious right voters that follow Pat Robertson, Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson is pledging to ban the, of course, non-existent ban on Christianity in public schools, which, of course, is just not a real thing. He showed up at Regent University and spoke to Pat Robertson, and he said, I will end the ban on Christianity in public schools. As you and I know, Louis, though, that ban doesn't exist. Take a look.
And, there are multiple quotes, if you look in our book, America the Beautiful, from our founders. I would begin to emphasize those once again. And if I were president, I would work very hard on eliminating the ban on Christianity in our public schools.
So when he said eliminating the ban on Christianity, I assume he just misspoke and he means the ban on Christianity, which of course doesn't exist. Students are allowed to pray in school, doesn't matter what their religion is, but you can't have government-sponsored or mandatory prayers. And of course, the government and thus public schools can't establish one religion over another. But Christianity is no more banned in public school than is the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster or Scientology or whatever. But who can control if a student is sitting there and silently praying? Nobody can control that. It hasn't been banned. And this is a trope that we hear time and again from the religious right, particularly the Christian right. Oh, Christianity has been banned. No, it hasn't. You just can't have designated religious time in a public school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what is banned, at least in some places, is the forcing of religion down people's throats.
Right.
And so I think that is actually quite important. And maybe he's just talking about, I don't know, the Pledge of Allegiance or certain things like little things like that. I mean, how important is that really?
The real question, I have the important question, is when does Ben Carson's book tour end? Because the presidential campaign clearly ended a long time ago, in spite of Ben Carson maybe not noticing or at least admitting that. And this idea of painting Christians as some kind of victims in the U.S., it's a total fantasy. We need to dispel this notion that Christians are victims in the United States. I think Marco Rubio would certainly agree with my phraseology, if not the message there.
Yeah. Are you a victim if you don't get whatever you want? I don't think that's really a victim.
Ben Carson also said when talking to Pat Robertson that he's staying in the race in spite of being way behind in the polls because he's not doing this for himself. He's doing it for the nation.
Right.
How staying in this race helps the nation, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I looked all day. I couldn't figure it out.
Maybe the more people buying his book,
Right.
the better off the nation is. Something like that, maybe.
I have a voicemail number that you can call any time of day. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received.
David, you are just the best. You are incredible. I'm an old man, but I am a golf teacher and a scratch golfer. I'm 70, right? I know what's going on. You are the best. Just keep it up. Man, I wish my students were like you.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you.
I wish I was better at golf. I for a while, tried to get good at golf. I think the best I ever did on a par 72 18-hole course, not a particularly difficult one, I think was like 115, 110 maybe. I mean, I just could not get it. And what happened, it was just hard to be consistent. I would get one good shot, and then I would just try to replicate what I did. And I think I just got into my head too much. I just could not improve in any significant way at golf. I envy this guy for being a scratch golfer.
Well, yeah, it is. It takes a tremendous amount of skill, and I prefer just to do chip and putt because driving is really incredibly difficult. It takes a lot of practice. You have to practice that more than anything else, in my opinion.
Really?
And I've always been terrible at it, and I don't want to do it.
I don't know if I agree. I mean, if you can just have average drives, right? You don't need to be a great driver. As long as you can hit it straight and sort of down the fairway, it's your second and third shots that I really was struggling with, just no control whatsoever. It was really, really embarrassing to a certain extent because all my friends were getting better and better, and I was stuck at like 115 every time.
Well, there's always mini golf, right?
There is always mini golf, no doubt about it. On today's bonus show, Dave and Lewis go to a hardcore show. That's what I'm calling the bonus show story today. We did go to a show, the music genre called hardcore, which I learned is not the same as heavy metal. And I have a sense of in what ways it's different. We'll see if Lewis agrees. We'll also talk about priests snorting cocaine in a Nazi room. And we will also talk about the Microsoft HoloLens, which will cost $3,000. This thing is fascinating. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up. But don't forget, Friday, today's Super Tuesday. Friday is Super Friday. We will be emailing everybody on our mailing list with a fantastic membership discount. It'll be related to the results of Super Tuesday, so we're calling it Super Friday. Get on our mailing list at davidpakman.com if you would like to be notified, and what can I say? It's going to be fantastic.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.